Okay, everybody, welcome to the next talk in the Confronting Coloniality in Indian Psychology and Psychology in India speaker series. I'm your host for today, Dr. Ravinder Bedi from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And my co-organizer of the speaker series is Dr. Suneet Varma from the University of Delhi, Department of Psychology. As you can see on my screen, we have our talk today from Dr. Misra, who's a retired professor from the Department of Psychology at the University of Delhi. As a summarized abstract, Dr. Misra states, psychology as a modern discipline was introduced in the Indian system of higher education during the British colonial regime. Its educational policy systematically marginalized the Indian traditions of knowledge and cultural processes from the mainstream academic world. Until recently, these two coexisting traditions of psychological knowledge remained in isolation, and a scheme of decontextualized psychology was practiced, nurtured, and maintained. The lack of cultural relevance, however, has drastically curtailed the potential of Indian psychological research and practice for problem solving and theoretical innovation. The necessary paradigm shift for true self-rule and ideas, however, still has a long way to go. So as I begin here, I'll just be taking a few minutes of your time to educate you about the purpose of the speaker series and Dr. Varma's and my intentions behind organizing it. And after that, I will turn it over to our speaker, Dr. Misra. We're doing this on Zoom webinar. So at the bottom of your screen for the audience, there's a button that says Q&A. You are welcome to post your questions as they come to you throughout the talk. And we generally will be going through the questions in the order that they are received. So please don't hesitate to click the question answer button, but note that we will not get to the questions until Dr. Misra has finished his speech there. Okay, so the Confronting Coloniality in Indian Psychology and Psychology in India speaker series. The purpose of this series is to better mobilize knowledge about coloniality in Indian psychology and psychology in India, particularly in Canada and India, and promotes application not only in India and Canada, but globally. More specifically, the speaker series adopts a decolonizing framework and aims to investigate, deconstruct, and confront the colonial manifestation of EuroAmerican psychology in the India national context. It is hoped that the end result is greater societal awareness of the legacy of colonialism on contemporary Indian psychology and further decolonization of Indian psychology and psychology in India. So based on that, I'm really comfortable saying that even though the official colonization of India is long over, the legacy of colonialism lingers in the mentality and lived experience of Indians all over the world. Partially through its political and economic power and interests, as well as its implicit endorsement of Western cultural superiority, Euro-American psychology has positioned itself as the universal psychology that applies to all of humanity. It denounces other global traditions of psychology as cultural or indigenous, but sees itself as acultural, objective, and scientific. It does this through purporting other psychologies, including Indian psychology, as biased and comparatively less globally useful, even when applied within its own country of origin. But Indian psychology scholars are increasingly reflecting on the devastating impact that adopting foreign psychologies has had on the Indian populace, including but not limited to their mental health, identity development, employment, and business practices, and the reduced ability to access effective Indian indigenous healing practices. Yet such knowledge and critique often gets overshadowed for several reasons, such as the lack of sufficient knowledge mobilization for such a small but growing body of critical psychological literature that challenges hegemonic ideas in psychology. So the overall purpose that Dr. Varma and I have for the speaker series is to begin to better mobilize such knowledge in one place in both India and Canada and promote its application globally. So our first speaker is Dr. Suneet Varma. Our second speaker today is Dr. Misra. And heads up that we'll be advertising our third speaker shortly. And that's Dr. Sunil Bhatia. And it'll be April 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern time, which I have to actually check the clock, but that might be, I don't know what time that is, 7:30, but it'll be early morning in India there. So those flyers will go out within the next week. And so the same place you heard of this current talk, you'll be able to access the information about the next speaker in the series. With that said, without further ado, I will turn my camera off and I will turn it over to Dr. Misra. And again, please look at the bottom of your screen, click the Q&A button, and from there, you can type up your questions and we will present to Dr. Misra at the end of his talk. Okay, Dr. Misra, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. I would like to begin with a prayer, which is from Kathopanishad. It says in original, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Saha Viryam Karavavahai, Tejasvi Navadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. It tells that please protect us both. May we together imbibe an attitude of spirituality. May our energies be productive together. May knowledge illuminate us both. May we never be jealous of each other. Oh, peace, peace, peace. Friends, this series is an innovative academic intervention in the domain of psychological knowledge creation. Today, I'm going to share some thoughts about the challenge of colonialism and coloniality in Indian context. It's very interesting that as historians of knowledge have accepted that about 3,000 years back, Indian people had something called Vedas. Then we had Upanishads. A number of disciplines also emerged, which dealt with logic, the analysis of emotions, analysis of social relationship. So a scheme of knowledge was present. Dharma Shastra is one, and that included conduct at different levels, the functioning of body, mind, and soul were analyzed meticulously in the system of Ayurveda. In addition to that, there is enough evidence that that system of knowledge included the domains about metals. It also dealt with agriculture. It dealt with the whole system of botanical world. The term is Vrikshayurved, and Ayurved for these trees. My submission is that system of knowledge was inclusive. It dealt with physical reality, but it extended to the inner world and what is called as spiritual. The exact terms are para and apara vidya. So it was very comprehensive. And how knowledge has to be achieved is one of the goals of Upanishads. The meaning of Upanishad simply means how to live in the company of a guru and learn and practice and use that knowledge. To be precise, that system of knowledge had a paradigm which was inclusive, which had methods dealing with empirical reality, but it also included understanding of higher mental processes, consciousness, and issues pertaining to the dynamics of mental life. Now, that system continued for a long time. And the texts which are available today provide evidence that interesting, useful, and comprehensive account was prepared, propagated, and sustained. Interestingly, that system of knowledge could survive in the presence of colonial influence. That itself is an evidence that it could resist the impact to a large extent. And that system of knowledge was not limited to one specific community, as has been stated by some of the scholars. We had a system which created an interaction with the people. The exact word is loka, that is the masses. So the process of culture, which includes transmission of meaning as well as processes, incorporated that kind of knowledge. So you may use the word vernacular, but the Indian scenario, particularly the linguistic scenario, is very complex. We have more than 1,000 languages, and out of that, about 20 to 22 languages are prominent and they have literature. So all that has contributed to the growth of understanding, which was shared. The term which is frequently implied is folk knowledge, and it is considered to be of lower order. But it is important to understand that there has been interaction between the system of knowledge which is in the text and the way it is being practiced. So there has been interaction between the two. The view of life which was nurtured in that context, incorporated, considering the transition in life across different stages. We know about the system of ashrama, the stations in life. So there was a philosophy to conceptualize lifespan, and a system of sanskaras was introduced to organize the shifts and changes in the lifespan. At the same time, the focus of an individual was to grow, and growth, or you may use the word evolution, focused on transcending the ego. Self-transcendence is the real meaning of self-realization. That was very interesting position which was nurtured. And a number of systems of Indian philosophy focus on the quest for Brahman. There is no translation of Brahman. Very tentative translation will be that something which grows. Some people use it in terms of the scheme which is given in Vedanta, and you have, again, diverse views within Vedanta itself. And the idea of Brahman is one which encompasses everything. And the great Shankaracharya talked about a system where there is no other. It's about oneness. It's called Advaita. So the movement was towards realizing that level of realization where yourself is so broad that you don't make distinctions. So it is more inclusive, and it incorporates all kinds of existence. That's an ideal. And that realization was considered to be the goal of life, which is summarized as moksha, liberation or salvation. It is also important to note that indigenous system of knowledge and practice which emerged emphasized equally on 4 goals, which include Dharma, prosperity, artha, kama, that is desire, desire for action, taking interest in various activities, and moksha, that is liberation. So a balanced view of life was present. I think it is important to elaborate the notion of dharma, which talks about the interrelationship of whatever exists. And dharma is the principle which is life principle, which maintains and sustains life. This scheme emphasized interdependence. This scheme also emphasized a kind of understanding which offers a position to see that there is something which is shared. This is an important assumption. One of the important texts that we have is Bhagavad Gita, which has been given due attention across the globe. And that talks about that right kind of knowledge is one which is able to see some thread which is going on everywhere. Avibhaktam vibhakteshu. So there is division, but there is some underlying unity which connects everything. So this kind of perspective is there. Let me mention that this is not the only way to understand reality, because from the Vedic period onward, it was emphasized that reality is perceived and experienced differently by different people. There is a famous statement in Vedic literature, ekam sad vipra baudha badanti, that there is one truth, but that truth is realized, understood, analyzed, reported in different ways, because the position of one individual or a community may relate to reality from one angle, and the other person or community may relate it to from other angle. So there is diversity of that expression of one single reality. Now, these perspectives were nurtured. I am not able to even summarize the entire scheme of knowledge, but knowledge and approach to knowledge and engagement with that system of knowledge did receive attention, and there is sufficient evidence that such practice has contributed to growth of knowledge. It is evident if you go to the various texts. The whole system, if I use the modern terminology, focused on consciousness. It had methodology, technology to deal with consciousness, and in modern period, Maharishi Arvind, Sri Rama, and many others, including Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, have tried to elaborate those ideas, and they have tried to practice that. I will just quote one statement from Swami Vivekananda, who says that the goal of his Ramakrishna mission is Atmanah Mokshartham Jagad Hitaya. That is, I try to get liberation for myself and to do something to achieve the welfare of everyone. Now, this kind of goal was also shared by Mahatma Gandhi. The whole effort against the British Raj, the British rule, was on getting swaraj, and that means self-rule. It's not that Indians will rule. Swaraj also had one important aspect, and that was you are able to regulate yourself. It was also important to achieve self-regulation. That was the meaning of Swaraj. I also like to remember here that in the freedom struggle, one of the leaders in academic world, a philosopher, K.C. Bhattacharya, talked about Swaraj in ideas. It's not only the political Swaraj, but Swaraj in ideas. You need to have self-rule in the domain of ideas, in academics, and in your deliberations in intellectual world. It's interesting that the tradition of knowledge which had contributed to understanding of psychological processes existed. The whole system of yoga, which was systematized by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, is an evidence that attention was paid to various psychological processes and mechanisms were identified and practiced to regulate life. And that regulation was not merely directed towards the physical world. It also talked about the social world. It also talked about the material world and the world which may be considered as spiritual. I just remind you that one of the Upanishads talks about 5 sheaths. One basic or foundational one is Annamaya Kosh. Then you have Pranamaya Kosh, Vijnanamaya Kosh. Then there is Manomaya Kosh, and then finally there is Anandamaya Kosh. I simply want to emphasize that multi-layered hierarchical organization of being was considered. That is the significance of this idea. So it talks about the different levels of functioning. Similarly, if you go to the yoga system, it talks about the yama and niyamas. These are the 2 important facets of yoga. Patanjali's yoga has 8 facets. It's Ashtanga yoga and yama, niyama, and then you have dhyan and dharana and asana and pratyahar. Then you go to the level of samadhi. I would like to draw attention to yamas. Yamas talk about satya, ahimsa, asteya, aparigraha. Now, satya, ahimsa, asteya, aparigraha, if you elaborate them, it talks about truth, talks about non-violence, it talks about having limited resources so that others also have resources to live. Aparigraha. Asteya means that you should not steal. That is another important feature. Brahmacharya, which talks again about self-regulation. Now, if you think about these as foundational to the system of yoga, they talk about a social world, the meaning of truth and non-violence and aparigraha, keeping things, in a limited way. All these get significance in social life. If you are alone, then there is no problem. But if you live in society, then you need to observe these practices. And Maharshi Patanjali states that these are universal. He states that they are applicable to each group, community, people from different religions, different castes, different belief systems. It has nothing to do with any kind of religious practice. By the way, yoga system does not talk about that great God. It's very interesting that Ishwar is a special kind of a Purush. That is the sense in yoga system. So the comprehensive way to look at, and yoga talks about regulating mental functions. And that regulation leads to a state of being. So knowing and being and acting, they are interconnected. If you go to other systems like Buddhist view and Jaina view, you have a view which is very close to the modern empirical view, the Charvak system. So the Indian thought system was very comprehensive and diverse perspectives were respected. There are different ways to pursue. There are different kinds of interests in people, and they try to follow those interests and concerns. So respecting the other was very crucial. And the whole effort was towards non-othering. The principle was that you should behave with others in a way which is good for you. So the principle was Atmaupamya, that is, you consider others similar to yourself, and that should be foundation for organizing your actions towards others. These are some of the ideas which provided a perspective on psychology. I'm not elaborating the ideas from Dharma Shastra or Kama Shastra or Ayurveda and yoga because we have limited time. But a comprehensive perspective is present, documented, analyzed. However, all this was marginalized, and the academic psychology which was introduced in India in 1915 was an extension of the British perspective. I think it would be appropriate to call it Euro-American perspective. And those who were responsible to organize the academic scheme were trained in that tradition. As history tells, Dr. N.N. Sen Gupta was trained at Harvard. He was with Munsterberg, who was a student of Wilhelm Wundt, and N.N. Sen Gupta launched the program at Calcutta University. We have celebrated the centenary of the establishment of psychology department at Calcutta, and we have brought out a volume on psychology in modern India recently in 2022 by Springer, which talks about the conceptual, methodological, and future perspectives in detail. Let me share what has happened in the Indian academic world as far as the growth of psychology is concerned. Psychology has moved in the academic world in a big way, but the template or the prototype was perfectly Euro-American. Indian psychologists got training at British universities, and then some of them went to American universities, and that trend has been going on. And the concepts, theories, methods were transplanted without looking at their relevance in the Indian context. The origins of psychology, modern psychology, I think very clearly indicate a bias, and that has been treated by several people. I don't want to elaborate that point, but now historical studies, particularly Danziger and many others have tried to look at it, provide enough evidence that the center was the Euro-American tradition, and that was extended to other places in the world, and that moved, or that movement became prominent with colonization. Now, colonization and coloniality are being talked about, and the fact is that the presence of the British had impact in India in so many ways. Its influence was visible in terms of problems with Indian economy. Before the British, it was growing, and the British used the resources available, and that was used for the prosperity of the British people. It is reported. It is evident. It's a historical fact. At the same time, they interfered with the scheme of learning, and they introduced a scheme which created a distance, a gap, as far as the Indian knowledge system is concerned. And they contributed to creation of a new system, the colonial system, and this colonial system was equal to modern system, and that was equal to scientific system. So scientific, modern, colonial, they became synonymous, and they contributed a perspective which was successful because of economic and political reasons. And that perspective was projected as universal, as objective, and as the students of philosophy of psychology, we understand that the ideas or practices of reductionism, objectivity, quantification have provided one prototype to practice psychology, and obviously empiricism and positivism are there. More recently, there is debate about the paradigms, and alternative views are coming up from Latin America and from South Africa, many places where this awareness has emerged that these views have limitation in terms of improving the quality of life of people. So in the Indian context particularly, the indigenous thought systems were marginalized. They were not received in this new system of knowledge. There are many issues pertaining to Orientalism and how the Indian thought system was treated. One outcome was that they created a kind of attitude which was very, which contributed to kind of aversion towards these useful ideas. It's very interesting to see that the implications of these ideas were profound, but they did not receive due attention. So, culturally blind perspective emerged, and the empirical view led to testing of Western theories in various localities. So the Indian sample was used to test American and British theories. So that knowledge is universal, and you use that knowledge, that theory, that concept. That was the strategy. In fact, the cross-cultural psychology movement, which became prominent, which emerged during 70s, and that has contributed to some kind of awareness, but it has its own limitations. We also know that the move towards cultural psychology, which and acknowledges the interdependence between culture and psyche, is a move which provides a better alternative to understand reality. Then there is also a move which is termed as indigenous psychology and also indigenization process. Indigenization talks about how a Western concept is modified, changed, suitably adapted to help understanding and application in a new context. And indigenous psychology talks about doing something to look at the knowledge which is native. There are several publications which have tried to analyze this process in historical context. The reviews where many colleagues have contributed, and many Indian psychologists have participated in this kind of critique. And there is growing awareness that culture has to be taken seriously, and culture should be resource of knowledge. It should not be mere target of knowledge. It is also important to note that in terms of methodological approaches, the first person approach must receive attention. In fact, the epistemological, ontological, and methodological implications of indigenous Indian perspectives are yet not exploited fully by psychologists, and there is need to analyze and see their implications and perhaps it will bring some fresh ideas and ways to understand reality. One important move which is taking place is that there is considerable interest among younger generation in looking at reality from social constructionist perspective, where people move beyond positivism and get a space where alternative views are being looked at. I must admit that these moves are quite limited. The majority of programs at Indian universities follow the EuroAmerican tradition, and the approach is again to innovate within that framework. There is also certain degree of resistance because of coloniality, because the experience of colonization has led to certain beliefs, certain practices, which make people adamant in terms of accepting the framework and perspective and methods, and they stick to them, and the consequence is that there is very limited growth. I must tell that many reviews which have been conducted by Indian Council of Social Science Research and also by many independent works by scholars have looked at the trends and changes which are taking place in Indian psychological studies. They indicate that very little change has taken place. It's important to realize what are the negative consequences of coloniality. And the move with Professor Bedi and Professor Verma to confront these issues is an important occasion to reflect, to relate, and then to move forward to get rid of the resistance. So the changes are very slow. We need to introduce these ideas to see the lacuna which is present in the whole scenario. What are the limitations? I must tell that in the international scenario, there is change. In particular, feminism is there, which has tried to offer a critique. Critical psychology is emerging, which is looking at the alternative options. Participatory paradigm is there, which is again looking at the limitations and offering new ways to understand reality. So the academic scenario is acknowledging, but the majority word is still missing. Ornett, who did a review of publications in 2008, has again done that review in 2021, and the outcome is that majority word is still missing in the database. So it's high time that we acknowledge the limitations, become aware of the potential of indigenous knowledge systems and how they can help to create alternative ways to look at reality. I think it's very significant that modern ways of looking at reality, the whole notion of modernity, the notion of development are being questioned. Now we don't have development, but we focus on sustainable development. We are talking about SDG. The experience in the recent epidemic has again shown the limitations of modernity. I think that the move which is taking place through this series of webinars is going to create awareness and help to realize the limitations and possibilities. I hope that in the last few minutes, I have tried to offer a bird's eye view on the scenario which is taking place in the Indian context and the challenge that is present. The challenge is in accepting the reality and trying to engage with alternative ways to understand reality, how to move out of this kind of framework, and what are the alternatives. We need to debate it, and then simultaneously, we need to pursue ways of understanding which help us. I would like to conclude again by one Upanishadic statement, Asato ma sadgame, from untruth to truth, Tamaso ma jyotirgame, from darkness to light, Mrityor ma mritangame, from death to immortality. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. In today's world, which is very sophisticated, there is scientific progress. There is also war which is going on for last 1 year, more than that. So it's important to realize that violence is there. How to move towards peace is challenge. How othering is creating problem and how non-othering should be brought in. We need to realize that there is something which is common. There is some shared human reality. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to highlight some of the issues pertaining to the scenario in the Indian context. Thank you very much.
Just to remind the audience, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a button that says Q&A. Please click on that and you can type up any questions or comments that you wish for me to share with Dr. Misra. Okay. All right, so the first typed up question here is, how do we use the rich Indian psyche originating from the scriptures in day-to-day clinical practice?
It's very interesting. The question assumes that the day-to-day practice has no place right now when you have to bring that. I don't agree with that. There is a limitation because psychology as practiced in India is primarily an urban, focused discipline. While India is still, if you look at India, the society, the distribution between rural and urban, if you look at that, we have not understood. We have not made any effort to relate to the broader society. And the practices which are there, they do have some version of the so-called scriptural. I don't want to call it scriptural. These are texts and there are concepts and ideas. So we need to critically examine those concepts and test them and see how they connect with our reality. It's very crucial that some of the notions which are available, for example, how to deal with pleasure and pain. Positive psychology has been talking about happiness, and today's research in positive psychology tells that everything with happiness is not good. There is dark side of happiness. So how resilience becomes important, and how dealing with pain and suffering has something to contribute to your development. You need to relook at the whole paradigm. And if you go to the Indian thought system, you have alternative ways to look at the reality and understanding the issue of happiness and whatever is being talked in positive psychology. It's not time to talk about positive psychology, but I just referred as an example. So alternative ways to conceptualize are available. You need to make an effort. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next question. Dr. Misra, could you throw some light on the notion of mental health and associated functions to address mental health issues as part of the indigenous Indian psychology? So I can repeat that. Dr. Misra, could you throw some light on the notion of mental health and associated functions to address mental health issues as part of the indigenous Indian psychology?
Yes, I think it's very crucial to note that a holistic model of health is available in Ayurveda, in yoga, in Siddha medicine, which are indigenous systems of thought. And there is no division between mental health and physical health. You need both of them if you want to use that. And you have to connect with the environment, with the world in which you are living. And your analysis of health should encompass yourself as well as your environment. One interesting observation in Ayurveda is health is an intersectional matter. How you relate to your environment, your practices. There is a concept of sadvrtta. Your conduct is very important. How you utilize the resources, what you eat, how you organize your life. So a kind of awareness which decenters the idea and incorporates body, mind, and soul, if you want to call it. And that is very crucial. You need to understand that. Only focusing on body and chemicals and all that is not sufficient. You need to recognize the holistic perspective, and that should be elaborated and used in the practice. And there is a lot to learn from that.
Okay, great. Next question. Good morning, sir. So I guess this person's emailing from India because it's evening time where I'm at. So good morning, sir. Can you throw some light on the concept of existentialism in Vedic literature? It is mostly considered a Western concept, and I am keen on finding the Vedic explanation for existential crisis. So I can repeat that one more time for you. Good morning, sir. Can you throw some light on the concept of existentialism in Vedic literature? It is mostly considered a Western concept, and I am keen on finding the Vedic explanation for existential crisis.
It's a very profound curiosity, I would like to say. What exists and how existence is conceptualized is a challenge which has been shared across Vedic literature and subsequent developments. And again, there are different models to view existence and reality. And they have, if you systematically analyze, they have consequences for your life, your connection with others. So if you are a Dvaita, dualist, or if you are Advaita, non-dual system, if you take these two only, you will see that they talk about one kind of reality, which is with form, and it is called saguna, with qualities. And the other is nirguna, that is, there is no quality. And the Brahman is considered to be quality-less. It's very profound, and you need to look at the Upanishadic view, one which says that Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, whatever exists is Brahman. That kind of reality perspective is very different. And you see it says that, this whole is such that if you take out from that whole, again, the whole remains the same. It's a profound observation. If you take zero and get zero out of zero, then again you will have the zero. So how you are going to look at reality? There are alternative. There is no one single perspective, and there is a choice even within Vedic and subsequent developments. Yes, I consider it as an opportunity to engage with existential questions, but there are different models. I will stop here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question here is, thank you for the talk. Do you think the changes are slow due to the colonization of the mind?
Yes. The way we partition our experiential world and the way we try to look at, for example, the beginning of teaching psychology starts with partitioning between independent and dependent variables. Everything has to be divided in these two categories, and you can easily make anything independent. We don't know how independent is the independent variable. It's not independent variable. And that is the framework. You start with this assumption. And as I have mentioned, and others have also talked about, coloniality is equal to modernity, and that is equal to the scientific spirit. You need to deconstruct it and locate the connections and their implications. There are some efforts which have started, and they are trying to deconstruct these things, but it's just beginning. You need to do more effort because early learning has led to a kind of resistance in the minds of scholars and practitioners. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, a question that I share, so I appreciate this question, but how do we disseminate this knowledge further? I mean, I'll add to the question. The question is, how do we disseminate this knowledge further? And my sort of addition to that is, well, this information is not new. I mean, I read some information about, decolonizing Indian psychology and about how Western psychology is impacting Indian psychology 10, 15 years ago. I think, yeah, I read it quite a while ago. And I think the first few things I read were from Dr. Anand Paranjape from Simon Fraser, where I did my master's degree. So there's a lot of these ideas are not new. And so I'm kind of stuck with this, is how do we disseminate this knowledge further so that it has an impact?
You live in a context like the structures which are there. In the university system, there are certain assumptions how you work, what is happening, at the, you may call meta academic scenario which is taking place. I am happy to share with you that perhaps for the first time, the government of India has taken a decision to bring change in the education system, and they are proposing that it should be India-centric. It should reflect Indian culture, and it should provide opportunity to become more and more flexible. And there is a possibility to make innovations. But again, our young colleagues may think that, oh, what is happening in the APA, and you have more than 57 divisions of APA, and you have psychology for everything. You have traffic psychology and whatnot. So that is something at one level which is very apparent, very attractive. So you don't go to these issues. People are in a hurry. Perhaps basic processes and understanding of psyche do need attention. Many authors, including Professor Paranjape's work, and there are many others. I have not, knowingly I have not mentioned the names of people. There are so many, so I just tried to not mention the various names. But the point is that Paranjape's work on like self and identity, and the way he has analyzed, and the more recent work which is under publication on yoga psychology, I think they're providing input for rethinking, and people are trying to use that. We have also put some volumes where material is now available. Earlier, all this was not available for students and teachers, but now the scenario is changing, and I hope some positive development will take place, and these ideas which have universal appeal and which do refer to the challenges which are faced by humanity, I think they will receive some attention and get place in curriculum, and some change will take place. I am hopeful, but still there is a resistance, and there is attraction to be like what they are. The coloniality has also led to this kind of, view or attitude that I must get recognition from them. I try to get validation from the other side. So it's a peculiar situation. Self-realization is very crucial. That is not happening. We need these moves. Now decolonial psychology, as you have, and many others, and the next speaker, Sunil Bhatia, and many people are trying to look at it. So I hope that all these interventions will trigger change in the mindset, and people will start thinking about it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm very pleased that the next couple of questions are from people in Canada and the US. So I'm very glad that some people have stayed up later to attend your talk. The first one is, do you have any thoughts on how Western trained psychologists can incorporate Indian indigenous concepts and healing practices in assisting those with mental health issues in India and abroad? So again, I'll read it out one more time. Do you have any thoughts on how Western trained psychologists can incorporate Indian indigenous concepts and healing practices in assisting those with mental health issues in India and abroad?
Yeah, I think it's very crucial to offer assistance and professional help where the issues of support from family, using the various kinds of practices, simple things like using herbs, using some kind of Ayurvedic medicine. And, there are many doubts about that. And now gradually there is evidence-based, practice which is coming up. And in the Ayurvedic system also we have many ideas and suggestions and ways to handle the issues. The communication is a challenge. And there are problems of using the original sources and how they are translated, and how they, from like Charak Samhita or Shushrut or other texts in the Ayurveda, they have been translated, they are available. But I think there is a need to rework them and make them accessible in modern phraseology, and that is something which is very crucial. That work has not been done. So I think this is one important domain where we need to pay attention to. And at the same time, our training and learning must include some of these resources which are available. So at the level of training, you need to get these inputs and change the mindset of people or mental health professionals. You need to work at that level. Now, the difficulty is that the way categories of disorders are decided, and we know about the politics and economics and all that of that DSM and all that is there. It's not perfect, and there are many critique. People look at that system, whether it is adequate or not, how it is working. It's important. We need to look at that also. And there are various kinds of culture-specific syndromes and other things are also there. The learning which is available has to be disseminated adequately. I think that step has to be taken.
Okay, great. Next question. Dear Professor Misra, I am familiar with K.K. Kumar's writings on the topic of indigenization. Are there a few other key works that you would recommend for those of us who are keen to introduce our US undergraduates to these and related topics, especially in the area of methodology? Again, Dr. Misra, I am familiar with K.K. Kumar's writings on the topic of indigenization. Are there a few other key works that you would recommend for those of us who are keen to introduce our US undergraduates to these and related topics?
In the last few years, several publications have come in terms of volumes. One, I will say, by Matthias, Mishra, and Verma, that is one volume which talks about concepts and methods pertaining to Indian psychology. A.C. Paranjape's works are there. Then there are some important publications by Ramakrishna Rao. Then there is another interesting volume that I did, and it's an edited volume, and it's a huge collection of contributions from diverse perspectives under the title of Psychology and Psychoanalysis. It's a part of a study of Indian civilization. A series of such volumes have been published. In addition to that, there are specific works in mental health by Shyam Sundar from Nimhans, and there are other colleagues. There is an interesting work by R.L. Kapoor. It's a long list. I think it's not possible to narrate all that. Maybe that I will prepare that list and make it available to you, and that may be disseminated. It may be made available to others, widely shared. Yeah.
Great. And sorry to put you on the spot, Dr. Verma, but if you feel free to answer, but I get a lot of my readings from Dr. Verma, his work, as well as the ones he sends over to me. So Sunit, if there's one reading you would recommend for the audience on Indian psychology, is there like a particular one you'd recommend that is accessible to undergraduates, particularly in North America?
Well, I would say two. One is the volume which is mentioned by Professor Mishra, Foundations and Applications of Indian Psychology. It was the three editors, M. Cornelison and Professor Mishra himself, and also one of the editors, which came out in 2014 from Pearson, India. And that's one. And it's there on the list which I sent after my talk. And the other, I think I would say that Professor Mishra may have, he has written some one paper titled along with the late Professor Dalal, titled as The Core and Context of Indian Psychology. So that is very informative, very comprehensive, and simple, straightforward reading. And the other, of course, is if somebody wants to go in depth, then Self and Identity in Modern Psychology and Indian Thought by Professor Paranjape, which is also included in that list which I had sent.
I forgot to mention New Directions in Health Psychology by Dalal and Mishra. That was published in 2012 by Sage. That is an interesting book, and that should be consulted. Yeah.
Right. And so if you feel free to email Dr. Verma or Dr. Mishra if you want any more information about these books there. Okay.
Sure.
The next question here is, it's a great one. Rao and Paranjape in 2016, in their preface to the book Psychology in the Indian Tradition, mentioned a project for developing a source book in Indian psychology. But they said that the project has languished mainly because it has not been easy to find either psychologists who have a deep knowledge of the classic works in Sanskrit, Pali, and Arhamadagadi, or classicists sufficiently aware of the perspectives and needs of psychology today. Has there been any progress in identifying people with these unusual combinations of skills? Have any institutions or governments become interested in helping back this project? So it's a very long question, so I will read it to you once over again. Rao and Paranjape in 2016, in their preface to Psychology in the Indian Tradition, mention a project for developing a source book in Indian psychology, but they said the project has languished mainly because it has not been easy to find either psychologists who have a deep knowledge of the classic works in Sanskrit, Bali, and Ardhamagadi, or classicists sufficiently aware of the perspectives and needs of psychology today. Has there been any progress in identifying people with these unusual combinations of skills? Have any institutions or governments become interested in helping back this project?
I would like to share that that project is still going on, and I am particularly interested in creating such a source book. I hope that in the next perhaps 2 years, that will be ready, where we cover several areas, and it will be very useful. Some of the works that have been identified or in Indian languages, they are being translated in English, and I hope it will be an important development. And the volume that is being mentioned, which is a kind of very good introduction to Indian psychology in Indian tradition by Rao and Paranjape, is definitely a kind of very useful introduction. But there are other areas which are not there, and they should be taken into account. The whole issue of using culture in psychological discourse is being attended to in many ways. That is also an important issue. You can't take exactly the scriptures and tell them that it has to be used in this way. You need to relate to time and place and the people. Those ideas are relevant, but you need to be sensitive to the current contemporary context. So I think one has to be cautious about that also.
Okay, great. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I apologize that we're not going to get to all the questions, but I'm very pleased that we have at least 12 more questions that we're not going to get to today. We'll probably have time for a few more. The next question is, thank you and namaste, Professor. What steps has the Ministry of Education taken to ensure that psychology students have exposure to vast Indigenous knowledge systems? Are they being included as part of the curriculum? Is the central and states introducing local approaches to mental health training the way it has been done for traditional medicine? I'm asking as a psychologist trained in transcultural psychiatry from McGill University in Canada, currently practicing in South India. So again, what steps has the Ministry of Education taken to ensure psychology students have exposure to the vast Indigenous knowledge systems? Are they being included as part of the curriculum? I think that's the key part of it there.
I would like to share that the scope of government's initiative is to promote free discussion and analysis, and the universities, the departments are free to organize the courses, right? It's at that level. They give general instructions, the Ministry of Education, that you need to bring in Indigenous knowledge system. It is very clearly stated in the document of new education policy, which was issued in 2020. And now it is up to us when we organize our curriculum, because universities are free to do that. There is freedom Now, if the faculty is confident enough and convinced, then they can bring in change. There is one organization which is governmental, that is University Grants Commission, and they formulate a model course curriculum. And it is up to the universities to use that as a resource. And I would like to mention that in 2016, we had a meeting and we did create a system of or a framework and course curriculum. And there we did bring Indian psychology in a big way. The curriculum includes that. But the colonial mindset of the faculty at various places, they are not ready to use it. They have to be convinced it's a big issue. They should be ready. They would like to be, they would like to use traffic psychology, not Indian psychology. That is the situation. You are impressed by these, new words. The mindset is very different. You need to create an awareness. What are the difficulties and how it is going on? Currently, the universities are engaged in creating courses in almost all subjects under this innovative scheme of new education policy. It's high time that we must attend to the knowledge and learning which is available, and it should be incorporated in the course curriculum. I will take this opportunity even to request Professor Sunit Verma, who is looking after Delhi University Psychology Department and reorganizing the courses. There should be place for these ideas. Only then there will be change. It's very crucial. So government cannot, dictate that this should be part of the course. They have provided a policy framework where they have explicitly stated and emphasized that the Indian perspective should be respected, should be brought in. It is up to the academicians, people in the departments, the faculty, to consider and use their wisdom to reorganize the courses to address these issues. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question here. Sir, is there a need to distinguish between Indian and Western psychology? Isn't it a symbiotic relationship?
Very difficult question. The term Indian itself is not Indian, right? It's Bharat. That is the original name. The name Indian was given by those who did not belong to Bharat. So that name was the Hindustan and India. These names were used by people who came from some other places, and they tried to identify. And now, if you read the Constitution of India, it says, Bediji, it says, India, that is Bharat. It is written in Constitution. They have to make it clear that India, that is Bharat. That is the statement. So this duality is there. Bharat is older. The ancient civilization, which is still vibrant in some way, continued for last 3,000 or 5,000 years. But the term India is very new. So Indian and Western, it is up to you how you are going to distinguish it. With 200 years, roughly 200 years of colonial rule by the British, our system of thinking, our practices have been influenced by that way of organizing our life. It has become part of life. So it is very difficult to go back. And if you have to communicate and live in contemporary world, you have to share with others, then you need to see how this mixing can be done and how damage can be reduced. So one has to locate those sites, those places, those opportunities where these ideas can be included and a balance can be created. You have to be aware of the contemporary situation and the challenges, international challenges. You can't live in isolation. So how you respond to that, it depends. And if you take books, you have most of the books written by the Western authors. They are being used as textbooks. So there is no place for Indian authors or Indian contributions. I've recently tried to create a blend and making some changes and creating texts where Indian authors, Indian works are also included. It's a difficult job. So the framework is the Western, and that is considered as universal. And it is only through decolonization that this awareness is created, and then you shift. It requires a paradigm shift, which is very difficult. But we should make effort because of the limitations, the fragmentation which is experienced, the kind of challenges which are there in the mainstream psychology. We call it mainstream, the American and Euro-American tradition. We need to see that. So some of the options which come from Indian or Bharatiya tradition, I would like to call it, may have possibilities to address those challenges. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, that brings us towards the end of our time today. I want to thank the audience members for attending the Confronting Coloniality in Indian Psychology and Psychology India speaker series. And I'll let you know that our next talk is from Dr. Sunil Bhatia, which is April 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and unfortunately at 5:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. But all the talks will be posted online. However, I do encourage you to try to attend early in the morning if you're in India, because it will give you an opportunity to ask your questions to the speaker. So once again, I appreciate everybody attending today. Special thanks to our speaker, Dr. Misra, and to my co-organizer, Dr. Suneet Varma. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.